I ain't never sleep.
All right, the hour is 9. You will see that I am not Ken McMillan. I am Mandy Lopez. Ken was called away on an emergency, and here I am. Let's keep our thoughts with him as he journeys back to us and hope that everything has gone well. Please, let's start with the announcement of the proxies. I have Greg Ciolis for Matt Vangel, Kelly Scott, Michael Desmond. I have Fred Agazade for Baba Sarkar. I have Will Monroe for Jeff Brooks. Kwame Aguiman for Alicia Latham. Brian McCann for Chris Barrett. And Fabio Del Piero for Juan Martinez. Are there any others? Yes?
I have for Doreen Boulder.
Okay, so...
I have signed it, yeah.
Okay, so Professor Suresh Rai for Doran Bolton. Anyone else? Yes?
I have the proxy for Roger Lane.
Okay, so Prasanta Chakrabarty for Roger Lane. Anyone else? All right, moving on. There is a roll sheet in the back. Please make sure you sign in. Everyone should have a name tag now. If there's any problems with spelling or your name, please let Susanna know. Otherwise, they should be good to go. And now we'll begin with the introduction of our guests. Probably starting on this side.
I'm Tom Glenn with the Student Modernization System Project.
Stacey Haney, I'm Provost Academic Affairs. Jane Cassidy, Academic Affairs.
Ted Martin, Coalition of Human Sciences and Education.
Steve Beck, Office of Research and Economic Development.
Matt Lee, Academic Affairs.
All right, thank you. Are there any others? Well, welcome. Were there any public comments ahead of time? All right, so having no public comments, we'll move on to the minutes. Typically, we give a little bit of leeway, so if you find anything that is not immediate but come up with something later, please send it to Susanna, myself, or Ken if there's any corrections to the minute. But as they stand now, are there any immediate corrections? All right, if not, can I have a motion to accept the minutes? Fred Agazade and Fabio Del Piero. All right, all those in favor? Aye. Against? Or abstained? All right. Next, all right, I will give a brief president's report. You can. All right. So we've been very busy. Ken was extremely busy before he left on his emergency. These are just sort of a summary of what we've been up to. You can see some of these things. They're not in. I don't think we've included them in the package today, but they will be forthcoming. So one of them is on the authorship guidelines, a dispute about authorship resolution that is underway. Separately, we've started some discussions on graduate student mentor IP policies. So policies surrounding IP that is generated over the course of a graduate student's program and how that should be handled, especially when a graduate student switches mentors or major professors, then who has control over the data and technology, etc., that has been developed in the meantime. We have some draft permanent memorandum that are surrounding the freedom of speech and expression. This is a topic that's come up many times over the years. It's moving forward. We had a few edits and we've been moving it around the executive committee, but it is coming along nicely. Similarly, PM80, prohibition of hazing, has sort of resulted from the well, it has resulted in part from the special task force that was developed over the course of the last year or so. As the executive members of the executive committee participated in the interviews with the 3 candidates for the VP of Public Safety, we all feel very confident that any of them would be a very good fit for the university, and we're all very impressive. The search committee for the Provost has been formed and is underway. It's my understanding that Skype interviews are currently scheduled for November 7th and 8th. The Vice President for StratCom is, as you know, sort of studied initially and then sort of changed, and has been in the process of identifying exactly the specific criteria for the job description. That job description is in progress, and we'll be hoping to move forward with that in the near future. Dr. McMillan, myself, and Dr. Cope all met with Dan Maisel. Much of the topics that come up are with auxiliary services and of course, campus safety. We recently met with Executive Vice President and Provost Haney, where we talked, the hot topic there was primarily the admissions exceptions. You've seen it essentially daily in the news, and we've got some clarification on that, and we also will be working with Jose Avila for getting more granular presentation of the data so that we can see sort of the distribution of the current or the most recent freshmen as far as ACT scores and GPA. So that's about it for the updates. As you know, and has been advertised, I think, quite well, the Presidential Symposium Behind the Ballot will be running quite well, about 12 hours a day on October 29th and 30th. You can see there's also an announcement, a very nice announcement online that you can, and it does all assortment of speakers. Additionally, there will be an AAUP guest speaker, Carl, I'm not sure how to say his name, but Weidergist, about progressive economic policies and economic justice. You can see the time and place there. There's an additional guest speaker, The Great Mistake and How We Fix Our Broken Universities. That will be on Friday at the Law Center. So with that, are there any questions or additions? All right, moving on. We have a number of visitors today. Our first one will be Joseph Gibbons, and he will be speaking on the McNair Scholars Program.
Thank you so much for giving me the time to come here this afternoon and share some information with everyone about a celebration that we're doing. So in my professional position at LSU, I'm the director of the McNair Scholars Program, and I see several familiar faces in this room, and I know that there's a lot of faculty in this room who are committed to our first generation college students at LSU. And certainly this year is the first year that I remember, or this year there's been a lot more attention on our first generation college students this year. And so I wanted definitely to bring some awareness to an event that we have coming on board on November 5th through the 8th. So on November 8th, it's the National First Generation College Student Celebration. So this is actually the anniversary of the signing of the Higher Education Act. And the Higher Education Act created things like Pell Grants. It created things like Upper Bound, Educational Talent Student Support Services. A lot of our education equity, opportunity, and access programs comes from that event. And so a lot of student organizations and professional organizations got together last year and said, let's make this a national celebration, like a national holiday to celebrate first generation college students on the anniversary of this event. And it was a good success last year. We participated at LSU. We did several activities. We had faculty talk in the classroom. We had social media posts, and we had an information fair. So we just did those three things, and it brought enough awareness that the Council for Opportunity in Education in Washington, D.C. invited some of our staff who were involved in that to talk about how successful that event was. And they didn't even know that we have a whole week planned this year. So it's really exciting. And so it's a joint event. Nationally, it's sponsored by the Council for Opportunity in Education and NASMO, which is the National Organization for Student Affairs Professionals. There's a huge social media campaign. They're going to be providing a lot of information and sample events that people can do on their campus. At LSU, we have several events planned, and we want to invite our faculty and staff to be involved on social media, to be involved in their classroom. If you identify as a first-generation college graduate and you want to share that information in your classroom, this is a great week to do it. There'll be a huge dialogue that's happening. So I wanted to tell you guys about the events that we have. So on Monday, from 11 to 1, there's a parade ground resource fair. So we reached out to several resources across campus, like the Student Health Center, the Center for Academic Success, International Student Study Abroad. We said we're going to have all our first-generation students here. We're going to be giving away Proud First Gen buttons that you see this design that we came up with, and stickers, and we're going to invite these students, and we want you to talk to them and be aware of them and thank them for being here and be excited for them. So that's going to be that day. It's going to be our official kickoff. Tuesday, the women's basketball is doing an official event. A lot of our coaching staff and the women's basketball team identify as first-generation college graduates. They're going to have videos, they're going to have events, so that's going to be a real fun thing that our students are going to be invited to. On Wednesday, we're going to have a town hall and ice cream social, and the idea of this is that we want to listen to the students. So we've invited key administrators and people on campus to be there. They're going to talk to the students, but more than anything, the students are going to talk to them and share their experience and their thoughts and what it's like to be here and what it means for LSU to focus on them as a first-generation college student. Of course, we're going to have ice cream afterwards, so it'll be on ice. And then Thursday, we're going to have a faculty and staff lunch and learn. We do several of these during the academic year. The Office of Diversity sponsors these. This one will be specifically focused towards our first-generation students. And we have faculty and staff on campus who are actually leaders in the field of higher education when it comes to best serving these students that are going to share some best practices. And Friday, it's going to wrap up on the parade ground with this carnival-style fair, food, games, and kind of the end of the celebration. So it's a lot of fun. The idea is just to bring an appreciation for LSU as this catalyst for change in families and the transformations that we provide when students come on this campus. LSU is transformative socioeconomically, of course, but it's also transformative in influence. Our students come here, and for the first time in their family, they become national voices and they have national influence. And all these things, I know first generation can sometimes be a confusing term, but ultimately we just challenge people to think about it as LSU being that transformative force in students' families, where they experience a lot of first here. And so we thank you, everyone, for thinking about it. What we would encourage you to do is go back to your faculty, share that we're doing this. If you identify as a first-generation college student, be involved in any way you want. This is kind of a decentralized event that we hope people get on board with and get us some momentum. Does anyone have any questions?
Can you just give us McNair Scholar Program? That's the first time I do.
Oh yeah, thank you for sharing that.
McNair and what's this?
Yeah, so the McNair Scholars Program is named after the astronaut Ronald McNair who perished in the Challenger explosion. And to continue his legacy, the Department of Education devotes funding to programs. It's grant funding, so we can write for these grants. And what we do is that program is housed at LSU. It's specifically targeted to first-generation college students and students from low-income backgrounds and students who are considered underrepresented in graduate education. And the goal is that these students, we prepare them to be competitive graduate school applicants and successful graduate students. So we pair them with faculty mentors who I know a lot of people in this room from being faculty mentors. They work on research projects. We partner with the Honors College, and by the time a student, when they come into the McNair program, by the time they graduate LSU, they're applying for grad schools, they've completed an honors thesis, and they're on the fast track to being successful graduate students.
All right, do you happen to know how many of our faculty identify?
We don't. And I'm actually on this kind of task force to create this event. And we've often thought, like, how do we determine that? Is there a questionnaire that we can send out? And if you have suggestions for how to do that, I would sure welcome that.
Well, anyone would mind raising their hand if they're a first generation?
College graduate? Great. So a little pro tip, the Department of Education has defined this as someone whose parents don't have a bachelor's degree. So if your parents went to college and didn't finish, you're still considered a first generation college student. Yes, I had a question back there.
Yeah, I was just wondering, is this schedule or is this information going to be available for the students? Is it going to be rolling through like the MySU homepage?
Exactly, yeah. There's going to be a whole marketing campaign that basically unleashes this week. And my goal is to try to get in, and this is kind of happening right before that, to talk to you guys. So expect a lot more information. There's a lot of links and information on first year experience. They're actually our official host for the event, and they've gotten all the information on the website. Yes?
Joe, is this a celebration? Are you hoping that will do something, or what's the intended outcome? Just to celebrate? Or?
Yeah, I think that's a celebration. So, you know, the one thing is we have a plethora of resources and support, especially that's happening this year, to help these students. The one thing that my approach to this is not this be a week of like, let's help you do better, let's work on deficiencies. This week is like, we're glad that you're here, and we're glad to be a part of this journey for you and your family.
Because this takes us to the next, really, I'm a first generation myself, but nobody ever give me special attention or anything. So, is it really like these students need certain services that we need to be aware of to serve them better, to make their, education until graduation more successful? Is it like statistically happens that first generation, they don't really, the success rate is less compared to regular students? What makes first generation students statistically different from just regular students?
Yeah, there's like whole fields of study devoted to that, and it's actually, it's a field that's aging, but it's also a field where new dialogue's coming in. And I think that there's opportunities to continue that conversation throughout the year. The one thing that we want to do this week is bring awareness, and part of it is the celebrating, and to have events, and hopefully on social media, and through interaction with faculty and staff, just a week where we say, let's talk about this. And so that's part of the issue. When we talk about a lot of things, a lot of students may feel that they're the only one here whose family didn't go to college. And they don't understand that there's several professors in the room here who would have raised their hands. So this actually addresses some of that, but I think that's definitely a welcome topic for a longer conversation.
All right, are there any more questions, Mr. Gill? All right.
Thank you so
very
much.
All right, next up, Vice Provost Lee to talk about something that's got pretty much everyone in a kerfluffle. And that is, how are we going to address the online accessibility?
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for having me come and chat with you for a few minutes. So I came at the end of the spring semester and gave you all kind of a heads up that we were moving in this direction of doing what we can to get in compliance with federal regulations regarding accessibility with online and digital materials. So I just wanted to give you just a couple minutes of background and kind of let you know what we're trying to do to set the stage for us to be successful here. So by way of background, we entered into an agreement with the Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights to make all online and digital content accessible according to federal standards. And so the materials that need to be compliant include things like websites, internal and external facing, software and applications like Moodle and so forth, and then digital course materials that constitute communications like PDFs, Word files, PowerPoints, and so forth. Over the course of the past several months, I want to give you kind of an update of what's been done. So we established a campus-wide working group, the Online Accessibility Working Group, which includes a mix of faculty and professional staff, and we just had a couple more faculty join us on that group. we worked with an outside company to kind of do an audit of our websites and give us a sense for how close to being compliant we are with the federal requirements and to establish accessibility links. So now when you go to LSU-based websites, you'll see down at the bottom there's an accessibility link there that can give you the information that you need in terms of being able to file a complaint if it's not accessible to you, if you have certain needs and so forth. We have established an intensive communication campaign, which I think is working because people are talking about it and have a sense that this is going on. So that's been going on, the awareness campaign. And then we established the new content and remediation plans in conformity with the OCR agreement. So that just basically says for new content going forward, we will be in compliance with WCAG 2.0 Level 2A accessibility requirements, and that for remediation plan, we will make reasonable efforts to get existing content in conformance with those standards. And then we had an existing policy statement, PS 26, that needed to be revised to reflect the direction that we're going. So that's kind of some of the things that have been done in general. I think you all are probably a little bit more interested in terms of what are we doing to help prepare those folks who are teaching or who are professional staff positions that are involved in generating websites or providing digital materials. And so I want to show you here kind of what we're doing to set the stage for that. And so we've started remediation of all OU campus and most of the WordPress sites at the LSU domain. So this is being overseen by the Office of Strategic Communications, and their staff is going through and making sure the websites themselves that are what they call centrally controlled solutions are in conformance. So that is moving right along, and they're basically right on track and making good progress there. They've developed a training program, which they call Training the Trainers, for website remediation, for new content development for those units whose websites are built within LSU's implementation of OU Campus or WordPress. We have a brand new training course that is rolling out November 5th. It's in beta testing, and I was watching some folks doing beta testing this morning. That's going to be intended for people like myself and you all, it's called Designing and Teaching Accessible Courses. And this is going to be some of the nuts and bolts of what you need to do, for example, to make a PowerPoint presentation meet the accessibility standards, or to have a Word document meet the accessibility standards. And so they're getting that in place right now as well. And we arrived at two formats for that based on a survey that we did of the campus community, of the faculty and staff, where the modal categories that came back in terms of preferences were that people would like to learn how to do this either through an interactive online format or through a hybrid format where some of it's online and some of it is in a course in a face-to-face classroom. So that's starting out November 5th. And we will, after this, we're going to provide you, if you want to email out to everybody, kind of a flyer that shows you how you can go and get signed up for that if you're interested in it. And then we are kind of putting the finishing touches on what's intended to be an online hub that is full of information in terms of how to do things, video tutorials. The staff in ITS are drawing up Grok articles and FAQs and so forth in terms of questions that are being generated. A lot of this is being carried along by some units that are being proactive and trying to get this figured out, right? And so, for example, engineering convened a working group that generated a whole list of questions that kind of came up in their process of figuring out how they're going to tackle this. So they've supplied that to us, and we've brought that. You know, I'm not a content expert. I'm kind of helping steer the ship a little bit here. But we have folks in ITS that are content experts, and LSU Online that are content experts, and so forth. And they're helping provide the information that we need to answer those sorts of questions. And so that's going to be unveiled very soon in terms of the pool of resources that we'll need to continue to make progress on this. And then the Faculty Technology Center, which many of you work with and rely on, indicated to me at the end of last week that they are getting people appropriately trained so that they will be available to provide consultations with faculty that might need assistance. They're also going to start offering workshops in January, and we have now kind of ironed out the process to provide access to captioning services. So many of you may have videos that you use as part of your teaching portfolio, and to meet the accessibility standards, they have applications and software that can make those captioned so that they meet the appropriate accessibility standards. When I talked to my colleagues in mathematics, they went ahead and in some of the courses they use videos extensively. So I think they're about done getting all their materials wrapped up for at least some of the courses like 1021 and some of the ones that are very highly subscribed. And then there's also been a pilot program where some faculty members have been working in the context of Moodle to go over their course materials on sort of a weekly basis and update as they kind of go along to get a feel for how it's going on. We've had very, very positive feedback from that experience as well. And I was told this morning that there's maybe as many as 50 courses that faculty are working on to kind of incrementally move that along right now. So the Online Accessibility Working Group right now is meeting on a weekly basis and continuing to kind of field questions and do what we can in response to the questions that faculty and staff have in terms of how they can continue to prepare to meet the accessibility standards, which we're shooting for August of 2019. So we've got some time, but it's kind of an ongoing process. And it's sort of a cultural shift, of course, for the institution. And it's a little bit of a fast turnaround in terms of the time frame that we have, because we're getting a little bit of a late start on it. But we're working on it diligently, and so I want to kind of come tell you what we've done, and then give you a chance to ask some questions here. I may not have the answers, but what we're really trying to do is get as many questions as we can in as early as we can, so we can kind of continue to build out both the FAQs and get a sense for what support is going to be needed for you all. So with that, I'm happy to field whatever questions you might have.
Right, Judith?
Have you all figured out yet who's going to pay for the captioning software, and if there's going to be a general part of this available to the whole university community, or if you're going to push it back to each of the departments, in which case we probably won't have standardized kinds of software to do that with. But mostly I'm going to know if you figured out how to do this yet.
So my understanding with the captioning software in particular is that we have a software called Kaltura, and they recently discerned that Kaltura has good captioning ability, but that we had not had it turned on. So apparently we have turned a switch and that's turned on. And my sense is that that's going to be the main resource for those with video captioning needs that will be available.
Well, the difficulty is that the best ones are only about 80%. So you still have to have somebody who's sitting there going through all of these. The math department is not, they're paying for it themselves and they've got people to do it. But it's like, you know, the 1 hour, 1 minute of captioning takes, 1 minute of video takes an hour to caption it.
Right.
And math is different because they almost have to do it that way to get the formulas and things in there correctly. But for most of us, you know, a lot of people will not have anybody in their department who can sit there and do that, so without some kind of payment. So I'm just asking.
Yeah, no, I understand. I mean, we don't have any particular resources, you know, set aside for this at the moment. You know, we have what we've been doing is basically prevailing on the goodwill of the professionals to kind of that are in their day jobs to kind of help us move this along as quickly as we can. But we don't have any additional resources, you know, set aside at the moment to help offset this. My understanding, and so I think you said like the best software is about 80%, which is what my understanding is for the software that we have, Kaltura. And what I keep being told, again, I'm not a content expert on this, but what I keep being told is that it's quite good and meets a pretty high level of need in terms of the accessibility, even though it's obviously not perfect.
Do you know if anyone has tried it to any extent? And you turned it off. But
Yeah, well, I think my sense is that it's it's considered the national standard. Like it's quite a high quality.
Has anyone used it?
I don't know if anybody here used it.
And thanks, Matt.
Sure.
leading us in a bureaucratic way. So, Kaltura I've used, and I might be behind the bar on this, maybe some other people are much more, but Kaltura was just an interface for me to do online teaching. It's not, as I understand it, a method to transcribe and caption your videos. Is there some kind of a new software that?
So I think there was a feature on it that wasn't being, that we weren't using.
Video?
Yes, this is what I was told, yes.
No.
And I'd be happy to double check,
No.
for sure.
That would be amazing to me.
Can I say something about this?
I've
know
never
about
heard
this.
anything about
Online programs actually has assured that Kaltura has capture space. That's what the program is called. And actually that is very good and much better than YouTube captioning and so on. That is what I have been told. I'm just...
Art, it still has to be done. It doesn't just do it automatically. You can't put in a video and then it like magically closed captions. That's just not.
It recognizes.
It does?
Yeah, it recognizes.
On an existing video, it does not. Maybe on yours. You're saying you could put in Grease too, and it's gonna.
It uses speech recognition.
Okay.
All right.
I mean, that's what I'm told.
That's fabulous.
Professor DeCarlos?
That's never happened.
Yeah, I was going to follow up with what Mary said. I am only aware of using Kaltura when I'm creating a video in Kaltura, and so I could see how you could utilize the closed captioning then, but I think the problem is that some of us have videos already, and I'm not aware that we can take an existing video and jump it in Kaltura.
I'll look into that and find out, because I had an extensive conversation with Sasha McNair about this, who is much more knowledgeable about me than me about online things, and she was like, this is actually
And
great.
I don't mean to be contrary, I'm
I'm
shocked that I've never, because we're dealing with like hundreds of videos.
Right. So Sasha was extraordinarily enthusiastic about the capability of this platform. So, and she knows more than me, but I'll definitely look into it and see what else I can find out.
Okay, Professor Phillips.
A non-technical question, I'll use it. If we link things from Moodle, I mean, outside resources, say on YouTube or wherever, are we responsible for those as well?
Yes.
Yeah, they're supposed to be compliant, and
so, but we have no technical control over those, so if they're not compliant, we simply can't use them or teach them.
I think that's an unresolved. See, these are the kind of things that are coming up on a very regular basis. I think in principle, they're supposed to be, but there are some provisions about undue burdens and fundamental alterations of how you approach the coursework and that kind of thing. Okay. So I think it's still unresolved, and I think that's going to be something that we're going to kind of flesh out in our FAQs very shortly.
So we should be looking for alternatives that are compliant. To use
to the extent you can. And I've learned some things that are kind of interesting. Just to give you an example, like questions that come up about, well, what about the PDF that I have my students read, right? And then I learned, well, when you photocopy something into a PDF, that it generally doesn't meet a compliance standard. But when you actually link to the original PDF of it through one of the LSU library's archives, that those are compliant by definition. So, right, well, they're supposed to be in general. The email I received this morning said things under the purview of the LSU libraries are compliant.
Right.
So that's super good news. And it will take some work, obviously, to set up so students access the original links there, as opposed to providing them with the PDFs. But still, it's a lower bar, in terms of the amount of work that would require.
Okay, I think we had a few more questions. Professor Urban?
I think you answered it. I put a lot of scanned readings on Moodle. I scan them and I put them up, and it sounds to me as though those, I can't do that anymore. Those won't be compliant.
So I'm not 100% sure.
So
hopefully we can find some solutions on that.
Get a link to the library, but not as soon as the library is comprehensive and covers all the readings. It doesn't mean.
Of course,
yeah,
right.
All right.
So these are the kinds of things we're looking for solutions for, because, and I'll tell you, I'll tell you very clearly, right? Like we had one of our colleagues in chemistry said to me, look, I've been teaching this class for 10 years. Over the 10 years, I have curated this class and calibrated it towards my students to to a point now where this class is great and is very effective, and I've got thousands of hours into developing it. And it's not even close to being compliant because that wasn't at the forefront of my mind when I was building it out to meet my students' learning needs. And so he doesn't intend to just throw it away and have to rebuild it from scratch. And I don't expect him to do that. I don't have a full answer for him yet, right? But I used to teach. I know how it is.
All right, then we got another question in the back.
So I too have heard good things about Kaltura's automated captioning, and it's very good, and even better than the 80% that we were talking about. But it's not perfect, and I guess I've also heard that a better standard is required for online courses, closer to 100%. And I guess I could email the working group about that.
Yes.
But there's no plans for human-assisted captioning service in the future?
There's no resources set aside for it at the moment. I think we're, kind of in the phase where we're trying to get a sense of how much support is going to be needed, and then I think we'll have a better sense, frankly.
All right, we have, yes.
I was wondering about, so in my department, a lot of faculty give PowerPoint presentations for class, and as I understand it, these requirements would only apply to if we posted them on Moodle. So the easiest way to obey this new rule is for us to just not post our PowerPoint slides. So a lot of faculty are going to be doing that.
That's a good question, because that wasn't my understanding, actually, but that doesn't mean you're not right. I'm just saying that wasn't my understanding. Because what I'm told is that it obtains for digital communication, whether it's in Moodle or not. But I had a conversation earlier this morning that prompted the same thing, like this right here. Okay, what is the standard? And so I will get clarification.
Right, because this you wouldn't have to have that because you're not going to give us an online version of this.
Right. But so I'm not clear, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing, which is somebody already brought up, is that some of my classes, I teach a small graduate class.
Yeah.
Where I handwrite my notes, and then basically I'm not going to type those up because it would be a ton of work. So I'm just going to not be able to give my notes to the students anymore.
Right.
So that would be non-compliant. So that I find that a bit frustrating because.
Yeah, let me get some clarity on that. So I'm not in disagreement with you.
Well, I mean, the system that we have now is that if there's a specific student that has a disability, then there's a note taker provided for them. I think that's a great system.
Right.
But the new system is it doesn't matter if there's no students in my graduate class that has 7 students. None of them have any disabilities, but nonetheless, I have to do this.
Yeah, right, so that actually brings up a good context question, which I didn't take the time to provide here, but I will. So a lot of the discussion is people are kind of thinking about this and figuring out how they're going to navigate it. Focuses on the issue of accommodation and your familiarity with. A student comes forward and says, I have a need, and so there's an accommodation made. So you can't conflate accessibility and accommodation because they're two different things. The way it's been explained to me, which I think is helpful, is that like when a new building is being built now, right, it's built with accessibility standards in mind, regardless of whether or not they assume that somebody with specific accessibility needs is actually going to ever enter the building or not, right? And so the legal term that they use is called proactive accessibility, which means that in the online and digital world, where possible, where it doesn't create an undue burden or where it doesn't necessitate a fundamental alteration of what you're doing, that there should be a proactive accessibility made available. Because this is something that comes up quite frequently, right? The idea that people have been taught for many years and they never had anybody say that had visual impairment, but now they are expected to get their course materials up to an accessibility standard, even though it's never been required before. And it's just the accessibility and accommodation are two different things. Interestingly, I noticed the other day, this Saturday, when I went through my drive-through at the ATM at my Chase Bank, for the first time ever, I noticed that the ATM itself had Braille on it, right? And
that's been the case for decades.
Yeah, I've never noticed it before, right? But I think it illustrates the point that they just are building them all out to an accessibility standard with the understanding that for the most part, someone who requires Braille is able to the ATM. But that industry kind of defaults to it for now.
Yes, Professor.
I represent the school theater, and my department is in the kerfluffle where we're really concerned about this because we have not minutes of videos, but hours and hours of videos.
Right.
So I think the question that my department has is whose individual responsibility is captioning these videos, and what are the consequences of not having them captioned?
Right. So the consequences question comes up pretty regularly, and we don't have any specific consequences at the moment, right? I think the new content and remediation plans indicate that local units should do what they can to get in compliance. But I think the idea of there's a lot of variation across units, right? Like, so your own group has video captioning needs, right? When I talk to our colleagues in engineering, one of the things that comes up is the mechanical or something like that, right? Where they have slide decks that are just filled with complex equations that are graphics, right? Astronomy and physics, well, the same thing, right? How do you get those in compliance and so forth? And like in PowerPoint, there's some things that you can do. But we're trying to figure out, like for that latter example, so normally with a graphic, right, there's if you right-click on it and it's accessible, then there's a text box. Or if you have a screen reader, then the text box comes up. But for a complex equation, you know, if the equation is sequentially building on itself over a series of slides, I don't think you're probably required to explain the entire thing through every slide, but you assume, I think you're probably expected to assume a certain level of proficiency as it starts out and moves on it. But in terms of the first question, I think it's the local units that we're looking to at the moment.
All right, another question.
But this may be another question for that working group, but is the remediation plan, the details there, is that published somewhere, or could that be?
So the details of that are going to come out on the stuff that was on that prior slide on the hub, right? That's where it's going to be like, I've got PowerPoints, what exactly do I do? And that there's supposed to be step-by-step stuff there. I've got a video, what do I do? There's supposed to be step-by-step. I've got, you know, Word documents or whatever. And what we need is faculty to come forth, like some guys in engineering came and said, look, I do most of my stuff in this software application. Can you give me a sense of like, can this be remediatable or not? And so we're trying to tackle some of those questions for them and give them some clarification on it.
So when will the hub be available?
It should be in like the next week or so. I think we're shooting for November 5th.
All right, and you have frequently asked questions, but where can people submit? I may have missed it, but where can they submit?
You can submit to me, Emily at LSU, but I think we have an OAWG at LSU website, email address.
Where they can submit their specific questions.
Yeah, and please do, right? I mean, the more questions we get, the more we can kind of flesh some of this out and give you back the clarity that you're going to need.
All right, do we have any additional questions? All right, well, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you all for your questions, of course. I don't know if that deserved applause.
All right, next up we have Mr. Tom Glenn, who's going to update us on the student modernization project. In addition to his PowerPoints, he's also brought I don't know what you call it.
We call that a business process map.
Okay, a business process map. All right.
Well, thank you. My name is Thomas Glenn, and Ken McMillan had asked me to come and provide an update on where we are with the Student Systems Modernization Project. And this really started last summer and last fall. I think what's helpful to understand is how complex the computer systems are here at LSU. What you see under the HCM and payroll and the financial management columns, those are functions that primarily are taken care of by the Workday product here at LSU. The student system, which you see in the gold, really represents the administrative student information system that's on the mainframe here that we need to replace with a new system. The purple sections you see under the student box, those are integrations to other third-party systems that help us manage our student records. A big one is athletic certification and compliance. So but they are complex. On the student side, while the mainframe here at LSU provided a shared service in human resources and finances to the other campuses, on the student area, the student records are isolated by campus. This campus operates on a mainframe system that was written in the 1980s, written in COBOL, and serves here. The other campuses, you'll see that Alexandria uses Power Campus, Eunice uses Genzibar, Shreveport uses Intergrove, and the Health Sciences Center at New Orleans and Shreveport use PeopleSoft. The fact that they use separate student systems and keep the student records separate by campus is a characteristic that we call in the industry, it's multi-institution. A student transfers from one campus to another, just like a student would transfer from a school in Texas here. Accreditation is separate. The codes that you have for your ACT scores are separate. The codes that you have for federal financial aid are separate. So LSU operates as a multi-institution system. And I'll stress again how significant it is. Well, last fall what we did, we worked with our stakeholders and had them identify what are things that you would need a new system to do looking at the life cycle of a student. So we looked at recruiting, admissions, financial aid, student financials, academic advising, and student records. And the stakeholders here in our office created those examples, and we asked Workday to demonstrate how that product would work. And we call that the thin thread, because it did get real down in the depth of it. You'll see on the bottom where there's kind of a complexity of campus. Eunice is at the top, because in the LSU system, it's a community college. The system requirements that they would have would not be anywhere as complex as what the campus here at Baton Rouge and the Ag Center would have. We met with all the campuses in Alexandria last fall to go through what we had learned about the Workday product and how it met our requirements. At that point, we had identified that as we defined them and as Workday understood them, they met 92% of our requirements. Didn't meet everything. No ERP does everything a university needs to do, but we felt it was pretty close. And some of the 8% were what we defined as blockers, that we were going to have to negotiate with Workday. When would that be delivered? Though it's not there today, when would it be delivered? And we would have to determine whether or not it would be there when we needed it. So we went to the IT governance and made a recommendation that we should go forward with the Workday student module, and the president and vice presidents accepted our recommendation. So what we started right in the spring is that a characteristic of those schools who have implemented student systems successfully, they invested the time to do business process mapping of how their offices and their institution did business. We engaged the services of Transforming Solutions Incorporated that have done this kind of work before, and we started to do business process mapping. And there are really 3 phases to that. You map out your current state, you do an analysis of your current state, and then you match out the future state. And with doing future state, you really have to have some input from your software vendor that you're contracting with to know what the system can do. So what we did is that we scheduled 164 2-hour meetings with our stakeholders across the campuses. People in recruiting, people in admissions, people in the graduate school, academic advisors, financial aid. And so we had a total of 328 contact hours with our stakeholders across the 4 campuses, and we came out with 348 current business process maps. And this is just an example of one of them. We would plot those out, and then we would go back and map those to the requirements that the stakeholders identified earlier in the fall to see whether or not we were really covering that. The other thing that I found very interesting when we did this exercise here, we brought people into the room to talk about how they currently do business. The one thing we heard repeatedly, we didn't know you did that. If you would just do this in your process, it would make our job easier downstream. And so what we found in this exercise, we're finding our offices here across the LSU system are finding ways to improve the way they do business today before we even implement a system. The other thing that is significant about this is as we went with them, we tried to color code what was an automated process and what was a manual process. What you see in the green is what they identified as an automated process that our systems would do. What's in red is a manual process that somebody has to touch that. This is just one example, but I will tell you, many of the 348 maps we've got, there is an awful lot of manual processing that happens here at LSU. The business process maps, you can kind of see a summary of how we did these by functional area and by the campus. There's 191 of these at this campus. One of the things that we discovered in the business process mapping is that certainly after the fall semester, the future vision for LSU Online changed significantly. But we went ahead and we mapped their current state business process mapping out. And the thing that we learned is that the current state processing would not scale to the new goals of LSU Online of having 30,000 by the 2025. So that was certainly something new that we were going to have to pay attention to. In addition to doing all this business process mapping, we started to negotiate with Workday about the statement of work. Clearly, we had come in December, we thought as we had defined it, as they understood it, they met 92% of our requirements. Workday comes out with a new release every 6 months. And so there was, you can measure what the requirements are in a future release as they have defined it. But some of the unmet needs that we identified were blockers. And the blocker is, we need this functionality to go live with the system. We had a meeting in March. We proposed to them that we were going to do this in 2 phases. Phase 1 would be we would go through and do the Eunice campus completely, from recruiting to graduation, and then overlapping that, but deployment that would be delayed, we would do the other 3 campuses. That is something I particularly like because Eunice is a community college and that would allow us to get into the system from beginning to end and see how the functionality would work, and we could learn that we could apply to the other bigger and more complex campuses. The other thing we spent a lot of time was clearly articulating what's the difference between a multi-institution system and a multi-campus system. And clearly an example is that the campuses using different systems, but they are different. They kept mentioning Ohio State is a big system. How different can you be from Ohio State? Ohio State is a multi-campus system. They have the big campus in Columbus, they have regional campuses throughout the state, but all application processing is done in Columbus. All test scores are sent to Columbus. All financial aid processing is done in Columbus, even though the students might be attending the regional campus out. That's different from LSU, which is a multi-institution system. Each campus is separate. A student transfers from one campus to another. And that creates issues about, you want to make sure you can keep the transcript set. You want to make sure that each campus can have their own catalog. You want to make sure that each campus can have their own terms. And so those were details that we spent a lot of time working on. They responded to us in June that they could not provide all that functionality that we needed with our anticipation of going live with everybody by the summer of 2020. And so they said they still envisioned that we could do the phased approach where we do Eunice first, the other 3 campuses second, but we were going to have to move the timeline a year to do that. And they also said they were going to need our help to more clearly articulate what's the difference between multi-institution and multi-campus. Just to give you some sense of the complexity of our student systems here, this is just a graphic I've tried to create that shows that we use a lot of different systems that touch student data. The one that popped out to me was cable TV. Apparently we provide cable TV in the residence halls, and that has to touch student records. And so there's lots of integrations between all these separate systems, and we have to manage that. I mentioned earlier on the mainframe, you know, because we're going to have to try to move all the things that are not student system related off of the mainframe so we can reduce the load on the mainframe to extend its life another year. This is just an example that all those things in the circle are student systems, or touch student data and other systems that are on the mainframe, and we're going to migrate all those off so that we just have the student's information system on the mainframe so we can get that to extend its life another year. So this fall, we've really been working with Workday people to identify what are the blocker and critical requirements that we have. Currently, we have 1,326 requirements in there. As I mentioned about LSU Online, that's something new in our scope. There's 167 of those for LSU Online. We submitted those to Workday not long ago, and they have responded asking for more clarification on 65 of those. But out of those 1,300 applications, we've clearly articulated that 529 are multi-institutional, 357 are what we define as blockers, and 263 are critical. We held sessions at the Alexandria campus in September where we had a full day where we had people from all the campuses come to talk about student records, talk about financial aid, bursar operations, recruiting and admissions, to gather what it is we really need to see verified in the Workday product. And so beginning tomorrow and on Wednesday, Workday has been working on those scenarios. They are going to be here on our campus, and we are going to walk through in detail the functionality that is there. We spent time going out across our campuses, interviewing students to try to understand what's representative of them and what are some of the complex scenarios that they have. We identified 110 specific user stories that kind of walk through longitudinally of the student life cycle, and so that's what we will be looking at this week. In addition to that, we are currently live on Workday on the HCM and the finance side. And when we bring up students, certainly there are places where the systems have to integrate with one another. And so there are 288 academic units currently in there. The academic unit structure, which essentially you identify an academic unit, but then you have to identify what's its superior academic unit. We didn't fully develop that when we brought up the Workday system, because Workday advised us that would be something that you would have to do when you bring up a student system. Workday is highly configurable in that you have that foundational area of academic unit structures, but you can also build hierarchies on top of that for specific reporting. One of the ones that we're most interested on the student side is to have a hierarchy on top of that that reports on STEM. Because as you think of it, students in STEM programs cross branches of the academic unit structure that we would have here. And then we also want to look at the foundation catalog and calendars. So our objectives really this fall is to identify the requirements of multi-institutional and the functional requirements. We've been very fortunate that Workday has allowed us to have direct contact with the people who are writing the code, the developers. I never had that kind of access when the University of Illinois implemented BAM. So I think they're really stepping up to help us be successful. We're looking at the academic foundation, how it touches across the HCM and the finance pieces. We're doing these life cycle demonstrations, as I mentioned later this week. And the goal is to get confirmation on when will that functionality be delivered to us, and will it meet our time, that we can then present our evaluation to the IT governance in December, and that they would carry that forward to the university administration. Tried to cover a lot. Any questions?
Okay, Mr. Glenn. Are there any questions, Mr. Glenn?
Yes.
The campus has so much problem with Workday right now, with limited use. So is Workday making any attempt to fix these before we go to this big project? For example, I get all these errors, but they don't know, doesn't say what they are.
Okay. I was not here when they did HCM and finance. Okay. so I don't know about that. I do know Workday is a highly configurable product. And I think LSU's approach is that when they implemented that system, it was important to them to stay on time and on budget. And I don't think they had the people here who had implemented ERP systems before to help them prioritize. What are the critical things that you need to do? And so one of the things that I hope to have brought here is that having implemented the student system for another university system is just the measurement of success is not that you can flip the switch and say that you have new software. It's that people be able to do their jobs. And that's why we've invested a lot of time on the business process analysis, and we will invest more time when we look at the future state business process analysis. But it is important, I think, because you can look at universities who have implemented student ERP systems. Some have been successful and some have not. There are reasons why. Some of it, the characteristics, are to look at this. For us in particular, we're a multi-institution system. It was interesting when we went to the Workday annual conference here a few weeks ago, and some of my LSU colleagues were talking to people from the University of Arkansas, and University of Louisiana, Texas A&M, and they had heard the Workday people starting to talk about multi-institution in the presentations for the very first time. The colleagues from the other institutions were asking our LSU, how did you know to ask those questions? How did you know that was important? The response was, we have people in our team who have done this before at multi-institution systems. Experience helps. So that's what we hope to bring to this. I'm particularly interested in the academic structure and the analysis because I know how it touches HCM and finance. We need to, in doing an effort like this, we need to add value to the system that we can roll reports out. And I think that's where we can really make some improvements here to the previous Workday implementation. But it takes work, it takes paying attention to the detail, and it takes attention prioritizing what needs to be done.
Any more questions? Are there really 5,000 COBOL programs? How's that even possible?
Well, when LSU built its system, they did really build what I think was a very sophisticated system. Other university systems that had student information systems, when they wrote them, they wrote a specific program that would just do like undergraduate admission. They would create a data file, and then the financial aid piece would pick up that data file and do things to it, and then write that file out, and then it would be picked up by student billing and financial. And so it was really programs that would do things, write it to a file that was on a hard disk. Another program would read that, do some things to it, write it back and forth. What LSU did is that rather than write all these files down, they did programming logic calls from one program to another. And, you know, at the University of Illinois, we had a mainframe system, but our strategy was you write things to files and then you write other programs that read those files, do things, and you write it back out. And the system here at LSU, they really did build a ERP system in the 1980s.
But how is that going to be incrementally retired then, or phased out if it's so without
And that's part of the challenge that we're going to have, just like other institutions that have moved to a vendor product ERP, just like Ohio State. They're on PeopleSoft. One of the reasons they're now implementing Workday is that when they implemented PeopleSoft in 2004, they customized it so heavily. They have not upgraded to a more recent release of PeopleSoft since 2004 because of the effort involved. And so they realized, PeopleSoft told them, we're no longer going to support that old release. You either need to implement a new release or you need to look at another product. And they looked at it, and the Workday product really is a very sophisticated technology. The life of these ERP systems are really turning out to be about 15 years. You know, technology is changing so much.
So we're way past our expiration in any case.
Yeah,
All right.
yeah,
Well,
you are here.
Are there any more questions? All right, thank you, Mr. Dunn. All right, next up, we have Associate Vice President Steve Beck to fill us in on all the doings of the Office of Research and Economic Development.
Well, actually, I'm only going to talk about Electronic Research Administration, following up on the talk you just heard. A lot of the stuff will sound familiar, but this is an effort that we've had underway for a couple of years. And I wanted to update you on where we are on it and kind of give you a heads up on how we'll be implementing the system. So the National Institutes of Health describes Electronic Research Administration as the critical IT systems that manage the processing of research and non-research grants at an institution or agency. At LSU, we've had Sponsored Program Systems, or SPS, for 15 years. And it's been a great product over that lifetime. It was custom built, like everything that we were doing. It grew and met the needs that we had from time to time. And it was always evolving. It was always something that we worked with. We also, about 3 years ago, we started using InfoReady Review to manage internal grants and contracts. So when our office would offer grant opportunities or limited submission competitions or awards, we would use this system to help us with that process. But SPS was designed specifically to only handle pre-award information. So it would handle filling in the forms, making sure you had all the information, routing them to the various people for approvals, and then at the end of the day, someone would then manually map that to a financial system, and then you'd have to download everything and upload it to grants.gov or wherever else you were going. It didn't handle post-award processing or reporting. You could, if a dean needed to know how many grants are currently under review in their college, they can't find that out. That information simply, it's there, but you can't get to the information. We had no way of managing conflict of interest reporting. It was all done by email. And the same thing with research compliance. There were small systems to help IRB, but for the most part, these systems are outmoded, and there are better systems that are out there. So why do we have to replace SPS? Well, we've just heard why we have to do it. The mainframe will be retiring. There are so many vendors that offer this specific kind of software package that it makes no sense for us to continue with developing SPS or even developing a new system on our own. It only makes sense for us to actually go out and find a vended solution. So in doing this, we wanted to find an application platform that provided integrated services for grant preparation and approvals, comprehensive on-demand reporting for deans, chairs, faculty, and administration. We wanted to modernize the internal review process and create a shared resource for research for all LSU entities. In the fall of 2016, my boss, JT Valsraj, asked us to put together an ad hoc committee to start looking into the arena of electronic research administration. What's out there? What can it do? How can it help us? What are the options? How can we see what's there so we can understand what we actually need? And so we put together a committee that included members from OSP, SPA, ORED, ITS. We also brought in people from the Ag Center and PBRC. What we discovered very quickly on was that any purchase would require their participation, in large part because all of them would charge you based on the HERD survey. So whatever institution, whatever you were submitting to the HERD survey, that would be the basis point for what they charge you. And since PBRC and Ag Center also report, our numbers are all combined when we submit to the HERD survey, we were going to be paying for it whether they were involved or not. So we wanted their engagement right from the start. I should back up just a second. Over that time, we spent about a year just looking at these options. We brought several companies to campus to tell us about their products, what they did, how they worked. We went to user meetings, And then we started a procurement process. And I'll go in that in a second. We did develop a set of criteria for the ERA that I think we did a pretty good job with. We wanted an intuitive user interface that had to be easy to use, easy to configure, and easy to manage across the board. We didn't just want it to be easy for faculty or easy for administrators or easy for IT. We wanted it to be easy as much as possible across the board. It had to be enterprise grade. It had to provide both multi-campus and, in our case, multi-institutional support. And it needed to be something that we could grow with as they developed. And we wanted an established company with an extensive user base and a best-of-class application. So as I said, the committee started in fall 2016. In the spring of 2017, we had vendors on campus. We wrote the RFP the following summer. We did a procurement in fall 2017. We spent 3 months just doing a product selection, over the summer, we had a contract negotiation, and we started the implementation process right now, or about a month ago. And we have gone with InfoEd Global. So InfoEd Global may be familiar to you. They are the makers of the SPIN database, which is a resource that's available to all faculty. It's a global resource for grant opportunities. They are a company that focuses 100% of their effort on research administration. They have 25 years of providing service to clients. It's a little under 400 universities, hospitals, and government agencies worldwide use their software. By all accounts, by every measure, they are a best-of-class product. And all the people who were involved with the selection and review were concurred with that assessment. So we also wanted to show you who else uses InfoEd Global. And it's a list of some pretty impressive universities, including my UCLA, go Bruins, but also universities like UAB, University of Alabama at Birmingham, Pittsburgh, Clemson, Yale, Princeton, Temple. All of these are Research One universities. They're either public, private. We have some land grants in there. It's really quite a collection of institutions that are involved with it. The strengths are that it is software as a service. It's a fully integrated process and product. We can integrate it with Workday and with digital measures, and I'll talk about that in just a little bit. One of the things that we really liked about it was that it was sponsor-to-sponsor submission for federal grants. So if you currently submit grants to grants.gov, you will never ever have to do that again. You simply submit through this system, and it will do all of that for you. It supports the entire life cycle of a grant, from the initial RFPs, the doing your budgeting, all the way to final reporting and closeouts. And it provides comprehensive reporting at almost every level. So benefits for faculty. So one of the things that will be a big benefit for faculty is it will simply be faster for you to get information into InfoEd because it will already be there. Because of its ties to the HR system, all of your salaries will be there, your institutional positions, the way in which you share resources across departments can be coded into that. It'll generate automatic current and pending forms, which for some of us is a big challenge. Does automatic calculations, and it has a very advanced approval scheme that will allow us to meet the needs of almost any unit within the institution in an effective way. It has an integrated conflict of interest management system that we're actually in the process of deploying right now. And that includes both PM11 management and financial conflicts of interest. It works very much like TurboTax. It asks you some questions, and you provide the answers, and what you have to fill in is based on the answers that you've made before. So you only have to fill in and only have to look at the things that are actually applicable to who you are and what you're doing. It has a modern system for both IRB and IACUC, as well as an integration with Faculty 360, so you won't have to carry over your grants from either with OSPs, kind of trying to get things over into Faculty 360. This will pipe it in, and you'll be able to make sure that your grants are all current in whatever vita you have. For academic administrators, the approval routing is really impressive. Again, many of the same things as before, but the on-demand reporting is something that we are really excited about. Deans and department chairs often call us, or their grants administrators call us and say, can I get this information or that information? And it takes 2, 3, 4 weeks, or sometimes we can't even get the information right away. And everything in InfoEd is pretty much reportable on demand. We will be building out standard reports for to address many of the needs that we have, but individuals will be able to go in and actually make their own queries if they need to. For research administration, it will be storing all of the information in a single location, which if you've ever talked to Dara Corville about this is a huge advancement. All of the paperwork, all of the documentation that you need will all be connected to a single record within a single screen that they'll be able to navigate through, which will make things much easier and much faster to respond to any questions that you may have. The award and modification documents are stored in the system. We're greatly reducing the duplication of data entry, and again, the expanded reporting. And then for IT, a lot of the things that we've been talking about with some of the challenges with Workday are things that are addressed in InfoEd. It is an enterprise solution. We'll be splitting it out between PBRC, Ag Center, and LSU. We'll have continuous updates to maintain requirements of our sponsors so that when NIH or NSF changes a format, it will automatically be there in your InfoEd instance because it is tied directly to grants.gov. And then it's a shareable service, and we have role-based granular access control. So in other words, we can give people access to far more information, but only the information that they're supposed to have access to. And that will be based on your role within the university. So department chairs will be able to look at information for their department, deans for their colleges, faculty for their grants and proposals. And it will be tied into the SSO, so you won't have to learn a new password. InfoEd is part of TAIL, which is ITS's effort to modernize the ITS system on campus, and we fit into a small corner of the graph that we just saw earlier. But we are fairly compact and compartmentalized, so we're able to bring this in with just a couple of key integrations, and the system will be working rather well. We have decided to go with 4 modules. We are first deploying conflicts of interest, which is all of your significant financial disclosures, as well as PM11. Sponsored programs will be all of the pre-award and post-award processing and reporting. We'll have a module that's just on human subjects and one on animal subjects. For each of those 4 modules, there's this 5-step process. And I wanted to point out 2 parts of it. We'll first start with a business mapping, which is just good practice in any process. And then InfoEd will be on campus to work with faculty and end users to develop the initial prototypes. In fact, we just had InfoEd here last week, and Mandy was there, and I spent some time with them. And then they'll go back and do their work, and then they come back with a final product with, again, more user testing and more user engagement. At both of those 2 stages where they're coming to campus, we've already laid out bringing in administrators and faculty to see those processes in action and get their feedback as to what works, what doesn't work, what needs to be addressed. And we found that this process is going to be very helpful to us as we move forward. In addition, we're going to be laying out some specific workshops, online training, and campus user groups. But the other key feature that we were really impressed with was that there's embedded user help all throughout InfoEd, and it's entirely customizable. So we are as we're laying things out, we're including embedded help right within the application so that you don't have to bounce out into Grok to see what you're doing and bounce back in. We will be developing materials in Grok and online training materials, but a lot of the help will be right there as you're filling out the forms. As far as a schedule, so we've started the process. We're working on conflicts of interest right now. We're about to start working on the sponsored programs module. Our estimate is that we will be rolling out the conflict of interest sometime at the end of March, maybe early April. The sponsored programs module will be rolled out in May, the end of May, and our transition away from SPS to InfoEd will happen with fiscal 20 in July. The human subjects module will be completed in the fall of 2019, and the animal subjects module will be done in May of 2020. And so that's generally what we're going to be talking about. I'll be happy to answer questions, but before I do, we need your help. We want to brand the ERA as something that reflects LSU and our research and our faculty, and it's also to get rid of a big problem that we have. We are using InfoReady, both InfoReady Review and InfoReady Marketplace, and now we have InfoEd Global, and I will tell you that almost at every presentation I mix those two up, all the time. But for everybody's sanity, we really want to have a moniker, a brand name for the ERA platform. And so we have a Name the ERA contest. If you go to that website, you go to LSU/research/ERA, and you can submit whatever it is that you think would be a great name, an acronym, and we'll be taking submissions through December 1st, 2018. The project committee will look at everything that's submitted, and we'll narrow it down to maybe 4 or 5, give it to Vice President for Research, and he'll make the final decision. But that's our plan, that's what we're doing, and thank you very much for giving me the time to talk to you today. I really appreciate it.
All right, thank you, Professor Beck. Are there any questions?
So does this look like we will not have 2 review process, like the first one, now we route the budget and justification, and then we go back route everything, saying fast lane or government?
You won't have to do Fastlane or grants.gov ever again. Okay, maybe there may be an instance where you have to do it, but the whole point of this was that this is a direct interface. It replaces the interface that you would do manually for grants.gov, anything in grants.gov.
Yes.
You mentioned that it helps you with like the current and pending.
Yes.
Who updates that? Is that something that we're responsible, because a lot of the granting agencies will change those templates every few years or so?
Well, so the way in which it will work is that we'll be able to create a report that gives you a list of all your current and pending research, and then that can be then adapted to whatever you need it to look like. I mean, right now we have a standard form that we provide that is used, but because the CNP will be integrated directly into the application, you won't actually have to print it out again. And so we will be working with them to make sure that that information gets directly fed in based on the applicant to the grant.
Wasn't there some goal to have templates that were specific to like NSF, NIH, that you could import the data in directly, or did I misunderstand?
The templates are the actual forms that come in from the grant agency, and the software will do all of the filling in the forms for you. So the idea is that you enter the data, and then it does the hard work of actually assembling it, putting it together, making sure it all gets into the right place.
Yes, they threw me into the mix to see if I could get stuck, and I did.
You did. You actually found it really.
But
It was
so the
good.
good news I got unstuck, so there's hope.
Yeah.
All right, are there any other questions? Dr. Sylvester?
Well, first of all, let me say, I think this has got a lot of great possibilities and will make life easier in some ways. But here's what I'm going to ask. Well, first of all, I did use Spin several years ago, and I really found it helpful, and then it just vanished. It just went away. And it was, I think, then coming through the library, and they said, well, we don't have the money to support it, so it's gone. So I have a website that's in WordPress, and it goes down, and I call them, and they'll say, oh, we've had to contact a vendor to do such and such. And then I'm in the pilot for the pilot, Moodle, whatever it is. And every time we have a problem with that, I'm told, well, I'll have to contact the vendor. So here's my worry, is that if we've got all of these things now on contract with vendors, what are we going to be able to fix ourselves? Or are we always going to be waiting on that? And we've already been told that with Moodle, we're going to lose features. They can't support all the features we have now. We're going to lose them. So what does the future really look like in terms of us being able to make this work smoothly all the time?
I really appreciate your question because it's a really important one, and it drove a lot of the discussion that we had about what vendor we would go with. InfoEd has been doing this for 25 years, 400 institutions. They are, if there's a problem that hits, it could be a problem that hits all of those institutions. And we're not talking about institutions that do $30 million a year. We're talking about institutions that do $500 million, $1 billion a year in research grants and expenditures. So we know that we're going to get, there's a high level of consistency and resiliency to the system, and we're very confident that our choice will help alleviate many of those issues without even having to call the vendor. Because it's, the other thing that really struck me about this is that it is amazingly configurable in that a lot of the challenges that will come up are things that we can address in-house. And we already have a team of people who will be working on managing InfoEd for us on this. So that there are a lot of the questions that do come up, a lot of the issues will be things that we can address directly. There will be the case, there will be the time when we have to call the vendor. That's simply a part of life. The challenge is, do we call the vendor? I mean, the question would be, do we call the vendor or do we pay someone to do it ourselves? And the trade-off currently, I think the trade-off from a management perspective is that it's more efficient and more effective to work directly with the vendor on some of those issues. But I am hoping that there's that a lot of those issues are not going to be present simply because we're just plugging into a system that all of these other institutions have been using for a very long time, and the product would not be as mature as it is had it not been for the many iterations that it's already gone through.
Is it going to pick up I haven't had a grant recently, but over the years I've had I don't know, 12 or 13.
Sure.
Is it going to pick up all of the ones that are already old and done, just so I have a record of what I did?
So one of the things that we are working on to make sure it happens, and it was in the chart that I have of the workflow process for all of the modules, is that data migration happens at every stage. So our process is, and this will be really important for all of the pre-award and post-award, is to have all of that data converted and brought into InfoEd. Because not only do you need it, we need it for historical reasons, the administration needs it for their budgeting and their view of what we have done in the past, and it's critical. We would not do this if we weren't able to access the historical data. Sure.
So I was there as you're going through the conflict of interest in the segments. You did say you were going to mention something about PM11 and how.
Well, PM11, so for those of you who do have outside employment, you should be familiar with PM11. It's an important document, and it is a big driver of the use of paper on campus. And we have worked with them to convert PM11 into a digital process so that we can process these much more efficiently and much faster. Currently, a typical PM11 can take between a week to 2 weeks to 3 or 4 months, depending on the nature of it. And with the electronic routing, if people are on top of it, it could be within a day. It's a much faster process, and it's a much better process because things will appear on in dashboards that will give the people who are managing it the opportunity to see what they have to take care of and work with it quickly. And a lot of the information that's collected there will be more automated so that you don't have to duplicate entry. We're also looking to change it, not change the form, but to enable the system to remind you after about 11 months, hey, you filed this PM11 last year, do you need to follow up and provide us with a renewal? And it's just a way of making sure that you're always up to date on the current PM11, on your current PM11 disclosures. So that's what we're trying to make life easier. And I agree with you. I think this will make a huge difference. Even just being able, the research administrator group that I spoke with a couple weeks ago, they all love the fact that they wouldn't have to go call up their friends in a different college and find out what your collaborator makes so that they could put that information into the system. It'll automatically be there. You add someone, you add a co-PI, all of their information pipes in automatically. And that right there is 3 days. So, okay, 2 days.
Any more questions? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And if you do have any questions, feel free to contact me or Robin Etheridge at ITS.
All right, moving on with no old business on the agenda, unless someone else has something that we've missed. We'll move on to new business, which is the first reading of the resolution 1802, University Protocol for Death of an LSU Employee. This was recently passed within the staff senate, and we have, the executive committee has composed, or actually just followed their lead in composing our resolution. Oh, is there a motion to accept this reading? Second? Sorry, guys. All right.
All right, this is sponsored by Faculty Senate Executive Committee in support of Staff Senate Resolution 18-01, implementation of university protocol following the death of an LSU employee. Whereas Louisiana State University does not currently have a standard university-wide protocol available to guide campus departments through the appropriate action following the death of an employee. Whereas the loss of an employee can be devastating to families and work colleagues, as standard protocol or checklist could easily guide departments through the necessary administrative actions and communications to ensure everything is handled in a sensitive, appropriate, and highly coordinated manner. Whereas the LSU Strategic Plan 2025 recognizes the importance of creating a community in which all faculty and staff are valued for their contributions in their respective roles. This should not only include creating a culture of support for current employees following the death of a colleague, but should also recognize the contribution of the deceased employee, which can provide comfort to the loved ones of the deceased. Whereas Louisiana State University does have a similar process in place following the death of a student with PS 63, procedure for notice when a regularly enrolled student dies. Whereas universities such as the University of North Carolina at Charlotte, University of Illinois at Chicago, Utah Valley University, and others have similar protocol and resources in place. Therefore, be it resolved that the LSU administration, with adequate staff and faculty representation, develop an appropriate protocol and resources to follow when there is a death of an LSU employee.
All right, thank you, Professor Sylvester. Is there a motion to move this into discussion? Okay, Professor Ali, and a second. Professor Riggs. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed or abstain? All right. Open for discussion. Yes.
I'm looking at the second whereas, and I wonder if there's a typo or something funny there. It says, whereas the loss of an employee can be devastating to families and work colleagues, comma, as standard protocol. And this word as maybe suggests a logical connection between what comes before as and what comes after as, and yet they do seem to be kind of unrelated points here. That it's true, it can be devastating, that's one thing, and then on the other hand, a protocol could be helpful, that's another thing, but are they really, does one imply the other, or vice versa, or what is, or is it as a standard protocol? I'm just not sure.
Could be and.
Could be a.
Yes. Okay, so.
But then, even, aren't you missing a conjunction? There's two complete sentences with no conjunction between them, or what?
All right, do you have, let's see.
I see what you're saying.
Standard protocol. I agree, that is confusing. Does anyone have suggestions for improved verbiage?
Replace it with and.
And, right.
Obviously.
And, or as in.
Well, doesn't it just need to be an A instead of an S?
Most one.
Or and a standard protocol.
Oh, right. That's what it was.
All right. Given that this is the first reading, we'll, I guess, accept that as, I think it's just a correction. All right. Are there any more questions, thoughts? Yes.
I don't know if it's the proper time to ask the question, but I'm in support, but I'm not clear. Is this just at the discussion point of this resolution? Where was this checklist come from?
So I think this is a recommendation to the administration to develop an SOP. Right. So there's no consistent plan or procedure or protocol when something happens. And we've had this happen several times in our college when someone is lost unexpectedly and suddenly, and there's no procedure.
Right.
And yeah, so out of respect to the family and the deceased and so on, it seems logical and beneficial. And also to take into account the people who are around. So it's just to ask, short term, long answer short is to establish just a standard operating.
Great. Okay, thank you.
I have a question. So it says that North Carolina, University of Illinois, Utah, they have one. Do we have that to look at?
We did not include that.
This came from, the staff senate has already developed their protocol, and we basically picked up what they said. So I would assume that they had, in fact, had it, but we.
You think we could
We
get
could
a
bring
copy
that
of
for
it?
the next, yes. I think
See
that's
what
a
their
good point
thoughts on
to include that for the next meeting, yes. Absolutely. And I don't know that it's in a short, we'll see what we can dig up, because it's a very valid question.
So with that, connote that it's a joint resolution, like can we use the same, a similar resolution that the staff senate brings up so that we're more in line, or is staff different than faculty? You know what I mean? Like if they're,
So I understand what you're saying. I think this would be specific to faculty, whereas theirs is specific
I
to
got you.
staff.
Okay.
Any other additional questions? All right, well, given that this is the first reading, we'll come back with some additional information and the corrections that have been recommended. I believe believe that brings this meeting to a close. If you don't mind to just put up the announcement. Is there a motion to adjourn? All right, Mr. Davis, a second. Mr. Bell. All in favor?